Hello and welcome to the Game Dev London podcast. I'm your host, Oscar Clark, he, him, and this is a community of people who love talking about the business of making games and sharing the details of all of that process, whether or not they're actually based in London. I'm here on a podquest to understand everything you wanted to know about game dev, but never dared to ask. And today I am absolutely delighted to be joined by the founder of the Elite Game Developers podcast, Joakim. So I'm going to just bring Joakim on screen. Joakim, how are you doing? Nice to see you.
Hey, Oscar. It's great to be on the show.
Cool. You have
Doing
been,
good.
Yeah, you have been on so many different teams, companies, investing. You've got such a great perspective. Your podcast is fantastic as well, where you're helping advise people. Let's start off. You've got in your background, some time at Supercell. You were co-founder at Next Games. What was your kind of entry into kind of the game development scene, and how does that form your perspectives in this area?
Yeah, entry, like probably when I got my Amiga 500, like that was the I think it was 89. So I was 11. So it was good times. Started doing dabbling with coding. Got a book on coding from the local library, and my mom was good at typing stuff, so I asked her to type in the code to see what happens, because I didn't have the patience to start writing. It was looking at texts,
I feel you. I had
12
an Apple
pages
IIe.
of code.
I had an Apple IIe, the same problem. Although I had to do the typing myself, I gave up.
Yeah,
That's why.
Eventually she gave up, and I just needed to go through that. And it's kind of like those days when if you did a small error in what you're typing in, there was no way of figuring out where it was. You just need to go through line by line.
But
So that was the
magazines also, they had typos in, so you had to find the typo in the code when you didn't know how to code. Oh, sorry, I'm distracting. Sorry, you were saying.
Yeah, it was good. Like, it was fun. I think, like, going back and thinking about those moments of feeling that, hey, this is something that I can create stuff. And then I figured out that I can start modifying what they were sharing in those books and magazines, like to tweak things. And then that became kind of that, let's say, a point where I figured out that, hey, you can do stuff on your own. You don't need these books and magazines to copy, but you can build your own thing. So I started doing stuff on the Amiga, let's say, like, there was the Amos. I don't know if you ever heard of that.
I don't remember
it's
that.
like a programming language. So I was using that. There was like early 3D, early 90s stuff. Just went through my teenage years of coding stuff, constantly trying out things, going to the PC and coding there as well. Then going to the university to actually do computer science and like just first like real job in the industry was 2001, doing like black and white WAP protocol mobile phones.
WAP.
WAP games with Nokia. That was fun. Also text message games and things like that. So it kind of showed me that, okay, like there is a life I could build around making games, like work, like sustainable stuff.
Yeah, that reminds me, actually. I think it's about that sort of 2001, 2002 time that I came in touch with some of the sort of Finnish industry, particularly around Nokia. A lot of the teams that were working at Nokia at the time moved into making their own studios. So people like Ilkka, who was, I think, was it? It's not Digital Chocolate. It was before that. Sumia. There was a company called Sumia that he had originally, and there's a whole bunch of people who are around still to this day, who started working in that kind of Java early WAP era, making mobile games. Even HouseMark guys were making mobile games really, really early on. And of course they're now console focused. But I think what's interesting for me is that you're there learning coding at a very pivotal time, I would argue, of this emerging moment of what mobile is going to be. I mean, how does that affect the way you think nowadays? Is that still there?
Yeah, it's constant. Like I was thinking, like 2003 when the Nokia Engage came out. That like it's a no-brainer that everybody's going to be playing mobile games at some point, because these phones are getting better and better constantly. But it wasn't like, I didn't see like there's like something like an iPhone coming out at some point which will dominate, and that's the model that we still have today, 15 years later after the iPhone came out. That this is the way that we use computing, this kind of small touchscreen device.
Yeah, I found it frustrating because I was sitting there. I left 3 specifically to go to NVIDIA to sell the vision of a device that had 3D experiences, that was smartphone based, that was going to transform the way we worked. And then the iPhone comes out, and there's no point in me carrying on that job, because there it is. That's the thing. That's the thing we're after. So I had the glorious luck of being 10 years too early in all things I do. So that's fun. So let's bring us up a bit. So you get involved with founding Next Games. You have a whole bunch of processes with that, and then you transition in terms of, let's face it, this is the reason why we want to talk to you, is because I want to explore the investment side in particular. As somebody who has helped people get themselves ready to talk to investors, but also who's been currently working on a fundraising process myself. I think it's really important that helping the game devs understand the motivations and what the desires are for the investment community. Now, you do an amazing job of bringing all sorts of people with different perspectives onto your podcast, which I thoroughly recommend people go check out, by the way. Elite Game Developer Podcast. We'll make sure there's links and so on and so forth in here. But I want to hear from you, because you're interviewing lots of other people. You do talk about things that advice that you give, but what is it that motivates you? What are you after? Having left Next Games, having starting this kind of journey, creating this podcast, what's your motivation? You're an investor in so many different games teams, you're a board member on so many different groups. What's the kind of glue of all of that?
Yeah, I think it's the whole adventure of the entrepreneur journey, which I have done a couple of times in my career, with my first startup and then with Next Games. And it's an interesting journey. And now, like, I think I'm in a position where I can do a lot of help for these founders who are also going to go through a lot of struggle, a lot of ups and downs, challenges, how to navigate all the landmines when you're doing your own company. It's still like an area that's very fascinating for me. Like I don't feel like I could like just pivot out of like doing entrepreneurship, although I decided that it's time for me to actually like do something else than just do another startup of my own. I think this gives me an opportunity to personally learn a lot more when I'm involved with like 20 different companies.
I think that's absolutely true. I think that's one of the benefits of the roles that I've had in the past, being the guy who's managing the platform. I got to see hundreds of different games performing in different ways, different markets, different behaviors. And I think that perspective that you get by being able to take a step back is really interesting. And as an entrepreneur now, I kind of gone the opposite journey to you in some ways, of different things. But the amount of, you wouldn't wish an entrepreneur's life on your enemy sometimes, because it's constant. There's no breaks. You're always trying to make sure you're looking for the next thing and the next you're trying to make sure everyone who's in the team is working with you. There's so many spinning plates that you've got to keep working constantly. So let's start with that. So obviously funding is part of that, managing and bringing a team together. When you're talking to a startup, what's the sort of first thing you think of? What's the best bit of advice you want to give them?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there's different kind of startups where the co-founding team has been together for a while. They've gone through like struggles that an entrepreneur's journey would entice as well. Maybe they've been in a company that scaled rapidly and they needed to scale personally as well to take on roles and stuff like that. So that's they're in a much better position. But then I'm talking to a lot of people who jumped into entrepreneurship because they were passionate about building their own thing and they loved games. They know something about game development. So that in that area, it is so much about like if you want to do this thing, how do you make sure that you're going to be alive in 6 months, 12 months? Like usually fundraising is you shouldn't treat it as a way to jump past some struggles and difficulties and getting past the nasty bits of the journey. I think there's some work you can do when you're bootstrapped still and push yourself past that limit where it makes sense to bring in an investor, because there's an expectation there, which is totally different from something of a bootstrap nature in a company. So it really depends on what you want to do. So if there's a mismatch there with what you want to do, I usually can spot those and give advice on those kind of things.
Because I think that's a really key thing we're talking about here, which is, I think, understanding that when you're making your company, you've got your goals, you've got your ambitions, you've got your drive, you've got your structures to build, you've got your foundation to create. But at the same time, when you're going to fundraising, the investor doesn't owe you money for your great idea. They're not going to, oh, you're a nice chap, here's some money. It's not like, well, I mean, that can help, but it's not the reason. At the end of the day, as an investor, you want to have the likelihood of a return, not necessarily guarantee, because there is no guarantee and most will fail, but the likelihood that you're placing a smart bet. Is that a fair summary?
It is. It's like where if you raise, let's say, $1 million for your startup, like you're gonna be raising again most likely in 12 months. That it's more likely to happen that you need to raise again, like just historically. So the key there is like, what can you actually show with that 1 million that you raise right now to actually get to a point where you can raise a bigger amount, so that it makes sense to have that sort of venture backed path going on for you. So if you're raising again that 1 million, you're diluting your ownership. The existing owners, like team members, everybody's diluting. So you don't want to do that. You want to show that there's progress. And I think that's the biggest mismatch usually, is when you're trying to raise, you're trying to do something huge, but like what's the likelihood that you can actually achieve a bigger round in 12 months? So that's the question.
Yeah, I think it's actually a lesson we've been thinking about a lot, because when we were starting out, as a publisher, it was very hard to get people to sort of back publishers. It's slightly easier in some ways, it feels, to get people to back an IP owner, because there's an IP at the end of the day and you're selling the idea of that IP and then the potential of success. As a publisher, you're taking a percentage of the IP of the developers you find. So it's a different model. And what we found is really difficult is we could raise a small amount of money to start with, not even $1 million. But we needed to be able to show progress. We need to show the ability that we have made an impact on the likely success of these games, that we have had an impact on that marketplace, that we have a structure in place, that we've gone from an idea of a couple of people who are relatively known to something where there is a team structure. And I think this understanding, I think, where you are, where you're starting, where you've got to get to, what the milestones are that the investor is going to be comfortable with, and that will give them reassurance that the next stage will scale and the next stage. Because at the end of the day, if you're going to have multiple raises, you need to have a demonstration, I think, of the market cap of the company, dramatically increasing in each stage. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And you can't really hit the pause once you started the venture backed path. You can do a pivot, but that needs to happen also very quickly. It's like you can't really like be at, oh yeah, we're gonna still soft launch this game next month and then we're gonna pivot.
Yeah, no, that doesn't work.
If you know that you're gonna pivot, don't wait for 1 month to ease the thing to the team. I think there's no, hard decisions is also something that should be second nature for a venture back company, like quick, hard decisions.
So what are you looking for? And somebody's pitching to you. Let's say they're starting off at the early stage. They presumably they'll have to have a certain level that they've reached before they pitch to you. I mean, presumably you're looking at, if it's a game, you'll be looking at a level of functionality. Presumably, I mean, are you one for the infamous vertical slice, which is something I'm not a fan of, or are you after data? I mean, what's going to capture your imagination?
Good question. I think there's also, it really depends. Like if you've already built something before that you want to show now, it doesn't make sense that you always have to have a build ready.
Yeah.
But what I feel is always helpful is that you can show why there's a potential here.
Yeah.
And doing that from first principles of like, yeah, we want to do a shooter game. Like, okay, like why would this matter? What's the unique thing about what you're doing? Like how does that make sense in the current market? Of those kind of things matter even more, that you're thinking about the go-to-market for whatever you're building.
Yeah, and I mean, for me, when I'm helping teams, I'm thinking about, okay, where's their data? So one of the key things I've learned from is the hyper-casual market, even though I don't do hyper-casual stuff, the kind of adherence to data to be able to reduce costs and allow that decision-making process to pivot really early, I think is really critical. So I'm a big fan of data, whether that's the Facebook ad, spending £50 a day for 3 days, seeing what the CPI looks like, great, we get something. Getting a sense of day one retention, again, we got something substantial. But I don't think that's the only way to do it. I think there may be other ways. Like, I'm a fan of things like Playtest Cloud or Antidote, where we get usability testing, where we get an NPS score, so a net promoter score. So would people recommend to a friend? Are those kind of data points interesting to you? Or are you more interested in somebody saying, here is like breakdown of this subgenre in terms of revenues and daily downloads, and this is why we think this is a market opportunity? What's the kind of angle for you?
That's a big can of worms. So like, first off, I sometimes when I get these pitch decks that are like a deconstructor of fun article, it's a bit, it's not always good, because if it's just breaking down what's happening in a genre, so what's your solution? And that's usually something that's missing in those kind of pitches. It's in a way like the Playtest Cloud is great. If I can also try it out and give my own feeling for what they're doing. I've like, spent 20 years in gaming, so it's like picking up a game and trying it out for a while actually gives me a sort of read on like what's going on.
Yeah.
I think that's a competitive advantage for me as an investor, because I spent so much time on the product side in my career. So like just playing a game gives me a lot of feeling about, like, because it talks about the team's capabilities more than what the build is doing right now. Usually regarding innovation, user experience focus, like all the good stuff that makes for a great game. So
yeah. But again, obviously that, I mean, I know you know this, by the way, I'm just saying it for the benefit of anyone listening. When we get games, they're quite often not quite to the spec that they would end up being. And then particularly about usability, particularly about first-time user experience. How do you spot this has a potential when there's like a problem with the tutorial, or when there's some like programmer art UX? What do you think? What's the thing that really kind of resonates with you?
Yeah, off the top of my mind, I think one emotion that I get when I see something really good is the delightfulness of what they've already achieved.
Yeah,
with what they're doing. Like there's a few years ago, there was a big rush to build a lot of battle royale games, and that was it was tough to get the delightfulness from any one of those products when I'd already been exposed to Brawl Stars, which felt like that already proved the genre in mobile, and like how do you compete against that? It's a bit same with the shooters. I think I come from the lens of looking at things on a more casual, kind of broader audience sense. So it's harder for me to maybe go and look at all the niches out there. But like, yeah, there's so much there.
Yeah, and I'm going to pursue that a little bit further, because you mentioned Brawl Stars, and obviously that knocked it out of the park because basically the team did what they do best, which is make sure it works at scale, and they spent a long time making that work. But it did prove a genre, and the question then comes up is, are investors just not interested in the Me Too's, or because are there teams out there that can get backing for doing something which will do a good job as a fast follower, but not challenge the king, if that makes sense? Is there something in that? My feeling is a lot of investors are nervous to do that kind of thing, but I'd be interested to see what you think.
Yeah, I think it's again about the team a bit more than looking at the Me Too thing. If it's a team that's gone through a lot of years in game development, and they have a game idea, and if they can point out why they think it's a good idea to pursue, usually there's something there that will give me guidance to actually analyze. So it's not about like, okay, is this game good or not? But it's more about like, what are they actually thinking about doing here, and does it make sense?
And I think that's really interesting, because I think the key, what I think you're saying there, is that whilst the idea is important, it's the way that the team can back that up, that the vision that they've got that's commonly shared in that group, and how they're differentiating from an audience point of view. I think those key things are really, I tend to use the phrase immediate, relevant, and gorgeous, because I want to know, this is how I used to buy games. Immediate means I get it straight away. Relevant means that there's a cognitive connection between the art, the gameplay style, and the audience. So it kind of resonates. And then gorgeous just is kind of speaks for itself. It stands out, and it gives me the chills, as you described earlier. So that then begs the question: is this actually, you're using these various ways of looking at the game to understand whether the team is the one that you want to invest in, and is it the team you're investing in rather than the game?
Yes, it's more on the team side, but there are outliers. Like thinking about Sky Mavis on the Web3 side, like that would have been hard to spot through like team and game, because the shift in the market, like the crypto craze that started like a year and a half ago, early 2021, like that is also a component to think about, like what's happening in the market, and the timing of this team and the idea. So I think there's three components to that.
Yeah, timing is. This is where I usually fall down. My timing sucks. but I mean, I think you're right. Team, proposition, and timing are absolutely critical, aren't they, in terms of that experience? I mean, I don't suppose there's not a lot you can do about timing, other than, in my case, I've always tended to be too early. So when I did blockchain stuff, it was to support a friend of mine's team in 2017. So we actually did the work in 2018, 19. First blockchain game approved by Apple, which is kind of nice. But that's not turned into a big scale thing because the game didn't do great. But we've seen this ebbing and flowing in the blockchain space, and of course a huge backlash. And I'm sure you'll know Jussi Laakkonen's view on blockchain, which I won't go into. My former boss at Unity has a certain negative view of blockchain, shall we say, as do a lot of particularly PC consumers. So is it that stuff is too early, or are we at the start of the wave of that? Or is the whole idea of it, if it's blockchain or not, just one element, and actually there are more interesting things about games and teams and general experiences that matter? What do you think?
Good question. I think it's a momentum that is driving these things. I think like Raf Koster's like stuff regarding game genres. Like I think there's a new iteration of an RPG always around the corner. So like it's a matter of the right team and the right timing to actually do that, pull that off, that idea for the next RPG. So it's a bit like, you know, how many shooters can the market sustain in 1 year versus like taking and looking at where there's less crowded situations going on, like which genres. I think that's an interesting proposition. And then thinking about like how do you make that into a big business, which has broad appeal.
I mean, I often find there's this sort of synchronicity as well in terms of the gamers and pitches. So when we were looking for games over the last 6 months or so, we've seen a massive surge of people saying, I've got this unique idea. We're going to have Twitch integration. I know, don't get me wrong. I love the fact they got Twitch integration. That's great. But they're convinced because they haven't seen it that their idea is unique, despite the fact that we've seen 30 of those.
Yeah. I think, yeah, that's an interesting thing. Kind of the upside, the unknown upside is a factor that maybe I'm kind of like getting my head around that concept. It's a bit tough one because like Web3 has a lot of that unknown upside currently, and I think mobile free to play doesn't. It's pretty clear like what are the winners.
Yeah.
So
I mean, mobile free to play has. I mean, I still think there's space in that and market personally, but the issue is that it is a space that has been thoroughly exercised for a period of time, and it will need somebody to come in and do something different, particularly with the the removal of IDFA, the effect on that in terms of calling the marketing on that, increasing the effect. Arguable how much has increased the cost of targeting, but it's definitely made targeting more difficult. And it's made revenue generation from ads a little bit more difficult. But we're still talking about a $100 billion market. So has it become saturated? Is there still space for growth there? That's the kind of questions I imagine you're thinking about all the time.
Yeah, well, I think the opportunity is that if somebody figures out the better go-to-market than Facebook ads or even TikTok ads, I don't see that as a new avenue of something that is gonna be like a broad applicable tool to grow big mobile titles. So it feels more like if there's any like community first approaches going on, some cross-platform approaches that might unlock like because there's still like billions of people waiting to play games on mobile.
Don't tell everyone my pitch. That's my pitch. I'm joking, but that's actually literally what we're trying to do is exactly that. And I think what you're highlighting there, again, not unique. I'm sure lots of people are thinking about it, as you just mentioned. This whole thing about looking at the market forces, understanding what you're doing as a business first, but having the passion of a game creator. I think that to me sums up what I'm looking for in terms of teams we want to work with. Does that match with what you're looking for?
I think so. A lot of exploratory attitude towards this whole business of, okay, like you're innovating on the game side. You're doing like interesting stuff. There's a capable team to make games, but like, how do you actually get this into hands of the people? Like, if you don't really like want to spend time thinking about like what could be the next big thing to actually like grow big games on mobile, I think that's pretty sad if you're still relying on paid ads. So
yeah, I mean, I think it's understanding. I actually think it's like going back to the 1990s where I was training as a marketing guy and we were talking about integrated marketing and synergies. Horrible word. I know some people don't like that word. I kind of like it. But thinking about how do you build community? How do you integrate that with your live activity? How do you make sure that you let your UA speak to the live activity you've got coming up, and so you're telling a story which can then feed into your PR and your ongoing engagement with players. How you get the influencers, the content creators to speak for that for you, and how do you build word of mouth around those experiences? These joined up ways of thinking, I think, is where the opportunity currently lies. But again, working out what works for your game, how you then present that in a way that you feel where an investor feels like, hang on, this has the potential to scale. I mean, I think because we kind of blur the lines between a publisher and developer and a tech organization, one of the things we encounter when we talk to investors is the VC market often is looking for the unicorn. To this day, they're still looking for that unicorn, that $1 billion company. How can a team credibly come to you and say, look at my game, look at my thing, we're going to be the next, we're going to do what Angry Birds, what Supercell did to this genre, this way of delivering content? How do you take that seriously?
I think there's a checklist, like mentality for it. Sure, it sort of starts with the team checklist of what they've done before. What's their ambition level? Are they really good at like company building? Like, even though they haven't done it yet, but maybe they've built teams. So that's the first place. So going through kind of like that list of qualities helps a lot in evaluating. If I can check all those boxes, and if the company is targeting a market where there's opportunities, the timing's great, I think there's no reason to doubt that it could be $1 billion company. Then you start qualities? Seeing that quite quickly. I think
you talk about team building, get that, but in terms of, I think there's a dot joining process that a lot of teams, particularly because if you think of a lot of the team, people who are going to be listening to this will often be indies. They'll be starting out on their journey. They're not going to get to that $1 billion kind of process yet. They're going to need to do their experience and show their growth as a developer. I'm thinking about that journey. So what should they be looking for about the things that trigger that experiential? It feels to me like a lot of the stuff you talked about makes absolute sense, building teams, structure or processes, stuff like that. But I'm also thinking about the content type. How do we differentiate? How do we stand out? How do we reinvent genres in ways that are, that do things like Pokemon did, where Pokemon Go allowed us to be the character we were in the original game with billions of dollars of branding, but we're not going to get no general person starting out today is going to suddenly immediately get to that kind of scale. What's the dot to that pathway, do you think, that they should be thinking
about? If I'm thinking about the success cases where there was $1 billion outcome in gaming, usually it comes from it's more people than one. Usually there's a good complementary skill set of somebody who's building the company, somebody who's a creative genius, and then the tech side is sort of just the best in class of getting stuff out quickly. I think that's key. Not the like the least bugs in the code, but the most quick and efficient and
ship it.
I think that's the mentality. Then a few things about like what I've seen, like big companies that have worked out, is that they usually build this kind of foundation where great games can be built. A bit like the Supercell model actually is I would say one of the best models I think for gaming, because it facilitates the possibility for people to try out ideas, quite unique ideas even, and go through and this kind of rigorous feedback internally about the product and play tests and everything, and everybody's trying to help them succeed. So I think that's interesting. Like even comparing to that as well. But I think like when you think about like a founding team building a game and shipping it, and it becomes hugely successful, I think I haven't seen that happen as often as I see this foundation first being built, and then you have the people join the people who join later make the hit game.
Yeah, it makes sense. No, I think actually that's a really good point. I think because one thing we often tell people who are starting out is make games, ship them. That's the way you're going to learn about making games. But I think having a kind of building up that team, building up that trust, partnerships, people that you can rely on who've got your back, but also who stretch you, push you into the next, the next and the next, and then reliably, repeating that process. I think the more you repeat the process of concept, delivery, release, maintain, live, that process repeated is what gets you that skill set. Then you're magnifying your chances of finding the one idea that's going to make the difference. It's for me, it's the classic sort of joke. It's an overnight success that took 40 years to get there.
Yeah, like thinking about going back into the Supercell story, what happened there is you basically remove burden from like the different layers of like people who have different kind of responsibilities. So if the founders need to come up with the hit game, they also have the burden of, oh no, do we need to raise a new round before we see success? So there's kind of like I'd say there's like you're sleeping on a bed, but it's lumpy in a way. Like you're trying to get to sleep, which is like creating that great game, but there's constantly this pain in your backside.
So I get it.
I think when you have these layers where you have the leadership who's focused on facilitating this environment, and then you have people beneath who can 100% focus on making the game into the best environment, execute their ideas, not to worry about like what's going on with the investors, the dilution, whatever. I think that really creates a lot of good stuff.
No, I completely agree, and I think that's really the crux of it, is creating the space, the breathing space for the team to be able to really explore the full potential of an idea. And I'm a big believer in using the hyper-casual model to kill things as early as possible, and then using the learnings from each of the iterations to find the next thing. One of the things I think is really important for the developers we work with is I want to kill the game, but I don't want to kill the relationship with the team. I want to make sure that they don't waste their money on building something that's not going to work, and instead build something that will. And I think data is a key part of that process, personally.
Yeah, I think the hyper-casual model, in a way, what it proved in the last 5 years that it's been existing, being called hyper-casual, it's like there's no real IP creation happening, which I think is the sad part of this model.
I completely agree. I think it's great from a mirror of production efficiency, but it doesn't deliver IP. I think that's I think the simplicity that is implicit in the whole approach doesn't afford for the investment in the emotional part of the experience. And I think that's why I want to try and learn lessons from these pieces separately and bring them together, so that you can develop the passion and love and the narrative and the experience of a larger game, but leverage the technique of the production to make the production as efficient and as targeted and as solid as possible. But it will only help you with the mechanic. You need to make sure that you've got a sense of purpose and progression if you're going to have a longer term experience. You've got to think about how the back end infrastructure is going to work if you're going to have a living experience. So, live games that players love and want to keep falling in love with over time and keep playing and want to keep paying for. I mean, that to me is sustainable experiences.
Kind of the most scary thing about thinking about this whole struggle that we have in mobile games is that we sort of forget all the great game development knowledge that the industry has gathered from making mobile games, like the whole thing about like how do you efficiently soft launch and keep bringing learnings in, and also the live ops models that we've incorporated. So there's a lot there. So it would be a shame if we just transition sort of like into something new and leave everything behind.
No, exactly, and that's kind of, again, you're telling people my pitch again. but this is the crux of it. I think it's you find the thing that makes it again. different investors, I think, want different things. So if you want the game that's going to be the big selling kind of big, juicy item, the gem, fantastic. But I think a lot of investors are also looking for sustainable businesses. So teams which are not going to just produce one bit of content, that are going to have the capacity to be able to continue to develop. And again, I know this is partly the difference between project finance versus, equity. But do you see that repeatability being a critical factor for you?
Yeah, regarding like processes, repeatability. Yeah, the idea of like people going from mobile games free to play to doing Web3, I think we're gonna realize that Web3 actually is not big. That it's more about like everybody's talking about this 2.5, but I think it's even like 2.25, where the NFT ownership layer will be kind of the new sustainable thing, most likely. And then we're just gonna move on to figure out how UA works again, like performance marketing, in a way where we can do the CAC to LTV comparisons and things like that. So I think that's where we're moving right now.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, my view is more that I look at it like the secondary market in PC in the old physical retail days. So I think NFTs allows us to do kind of some sense of ownership and some sense of resale, but the proportion of people who will do that and invest in that, particularly the play to earn side of things, I think will be relatively small. It's not like we haven't had play to earn before. It has existed. It just hasn't taken off. So I think the question is, different segments want different things from a game. There are a whole bunch of people, probably the majority, just want to enjoy and cherish, and then maybe they'll get some things that they get to keep out of it, in the same way that I would buy T-shirts, same way I buy, crazy little Fallout figures, because I'm a fan of Fallout. But then the ability to resell them, it'll be a subset of that audience. But that's why I think blockchain is interesting. Is when does that become interoperable? When does that become something which is not just an image? I know there's a whole bunch of conversations about that, but we all know the limitations of that process. Just taking an asset, a 3D graphical asset, and putting it in a different game doesn't just work like magic. It needs a whole bunch of agreed approaches and systems and stuff like that, which don't exist yet. So let's kind of wind this up to a conclusion. So, I mean, you're sat there, you're talking to a lot of investors, you're doing investment, you're sitting on a lot of boards. If you were to give one piece of advice to a team starting out, it'd probably be a long bit of advice, I suspect, but we'll see. What is the thing that someone starting out who's going to want to get to the point where they can raise a significant amount of money, they can scale a game or a team, what should they be thinking about?
They should study the venture-backed model. If they want to go that route, they should really understand all the nuances there. Like I've created a lot of content on elitegamedevelopers.com, so you can read my newsletter and listen to the podcast and the pieces I have there. I think that's where you gain an edge if you educate yourself, because it's not like you just have a game idea and then you can go pitching. I think there's more to that which people don't realize, but it's not rocket science. So
no, I totally agree, and I thoroughly recommend people do that. There's some amazing stuff on the site there, well worth checking out. And I've read most of it as well. You think I'd know all this stuff? I still find it I think even if you think you know this stuff, it's definitely worth stepping back and looking at, like you did a piece on working out the valuation of a company in particular. I thought was really interesting. There's stuff like that which I think is really fascinating, that it's even if you think you know this stuff, it's worth taking a step back and educating yourself. I think one of the things I've learned, and we used to call me Chief of Curiosity, because I think having a constant desire to learn, to expand your knowledge, and to not assume that you know. I might stand on stage pontificating, pretending I know things, but reality is that I'm learning every single time I stand on stage, because I'm listening to people like Joakim and all the other guys out there talking about what they're doing in the market, what they're doing there. I think it's always worthwhile if you can spend time stepping back, paying attention, and looking at the different financial models, looking at the different business models, treating games as a business. It is a passion, yes, but we have to treat it like a business, I would argue.
Yeah,
totally. So in summary then, so I mean, obviously people can find you on the Elite Game Developer podcast. Do you want to share some details about that, what your next interviews are likely to be, so people can check it out?
Yeah, so I've been on a hiatus for the summer months. The podcast is coming back at the end of September 2022. So if people don't know, I publish a weekly newsletter around also the topics that we just covered with Oscar here for last half an hour. So like, just, you can go to elitegamedevelopers.com. You can find the podcast, the newsletter there, everything I've been writing about.
And I thoroughly recommend that people do that. I am a subscriber, as I'm sure you know. So with that in mind, hopefully you got a lot out of that. I will basically say thank you for taking part in this. We really appreciate you taking the time out. And I know next week, for those people who are watching this, is probably past, but we will be in Helsinki for Pocket Gamer Connect. So hopefully I will see you there in person. In short, though, this has been your Game Developer podcast, and please check out the details. If you liked it, please do the usual: like, subscribe, share, tell other people about it. All the usual stuff that you do with podcasts. There's also the Discord group you can check out. So go and follow up with questions or thoughts there. And if you want to get hold of us, I've included. We'll include Joakim's Twitter handle and also links to the Elite Game Developer podcast. I have been Oscar Clark. I have been your Game Dev London podcast host. This has been my podquest to learn everything I want to know about game dev, but never dared to ask. Thank you very much.